It started off as just another normal morning in my quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where the sound of lawnmowers and chirping birds usually fill the air instead of arguments and chaos. The sun was still low, a soft orange glow brushing over rooftops, and I was sipping on my first cup of coffee by the window, watching the world slowly wake up. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first, until I noticed movement near the edge of my driveway. There she was again. Karen, my not-so-friendly HOA neighbor who had somehow decided that part of her life's mission was to make mine miserable. I don't know if you've ever had a neighbor like this, someone who constantly hovers, complains, and inserts themselves into every minor detail of your life, but if you have, then you know how draining it can be. For me, that draining presence came packaged in the form of a woman with a clipboard, a constant scowl, and a very unhealthy obsession with my trash can. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. A trash can? Really? Of all the things to fight about in life, why would anyone focus their energy on something as boring and ordinary as a garbage bin? But that's the thing about Karen. She didn't just see it as a trash can, she saw it as a weapon in her personal war of control. For weeks, I had been noticing the same strange pattern. I'd take out my trash the night before pickup, like everyone else in the neighborhood did. I'd roll the can to the edge of the driveway, secure the lid, and leave it there for the garbage truck in the morning. But by the time I'd head out after breakfast, the can wouldn't be standing where I left it. Sometimes it was tipped over, spilling bags onto the ground. Sometimes it was dragged a few feet into the street, lying on its side like it had been shoved. Other times it was back upright, but moved in a way that made it obvious someone had tampered with it. At first, I thought maybe it was raccoons, or kids messing around, or maybe even the wind. But the more it happened, the less those explanations made sense. The lid was too heavy for wind, the mess too deliberate for animals, and the timing too consistent for kids who should have been asleep. Slowly, I started piecing the puzzle together, and all the signs pointed to one person: Karen. This was the same woman who had complained that my grass was half an inch taller than HOA regulations allowed. The same woman who once left a printed letter in my mailbox about my excessively bright Christmas lights, even though half the neighborhood had way bigger displays. The same woman who patrolled the street like a self-appointed sheriff, taking notes on her clipboard, whispering into her phone, and glaring at anyone who dared to park on the curb longer than 5 minutes. So, yeah, when my trash can started ending up on its side every week, it didn't take long to connect the dots. And the worst part? She didn't even try to hide it. I'd sometimes catch her in the act through my blinds, marching down the sidewalk, pausing at my driveway, and then suddenly, whoops, my bin would be on its side. She'd look around, pretending to inspect the area, but the smug smirk on her face told me everything I needed to know. It wasn't just annoying, it was personal. And that's when something inside me clicked. If Karen wanted to keep playing these little games, then fine. But I wasn't going to sit back and let her win. Not this time. I decided I was going to fight back, but not in the way she expected. See, people like Karen thrive on confrontation. They want you to storm out of your house, screaming, pointing fingers, and creating a scene that they can twist into their favor. That's how they win, by baiting you into looking like the bad guy. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I decided I'd use her own behavior against her. If she thought messing with my trash can was a game, then I was going to change the rules. The first step was gathering proof. I wanted undeniable evidence that she was the one knocking it over. I already had suspicions, but suspicions don't hold up when the HOA gets involved. And trust me, if I accused Karen without solid proof, she'd turn it around and make it look like I was harassing her. So, I invested in something that would change everything. A discreet security camera with night vision, motion detection, and cloud backup. I set it up late one night, carefully angling it so it pointed directly at my trash can but didn't look obvious from the street. To anyone walking by, it just looked like a regular porch light. But behind that little device was the power to finally expose the truth. The next trash pickup day, I followed my usual routine. Took the bin out, secured the lid, and went inside. But this time, I didn't just walk away and forget about it. No, I sat back with my phone, watching the live feed. For hours, nothing happened. The street stayed quiet. A car or two drove past, a dog barked in the distance. Midnight came and went. Still nothing. But then, just before dawn, movement flickered across the screen. My heart rate jumped as I zoomed in, and there she was, Karen, wearing a baggy sweatshirt, glancing around nervously, her eyes darting like a cartoon villain. She stepped right up to my trash can, looked over both shoulders, and with one swift shove, knocked it onto the ground. Bags spilled out, one even tearing open to reveal a mess of junk mail and food wrappers. She bent down, pretending to pick it up, but instead dragged it a few feet into the street and left it there before walking off like nothing happened. I couldn't believe it. I finally had her caught red-handed, and as I replayed the footage again and again, an idea began forming in my mind. This wasn't just about exposing her, it was about teaching her a lesson she wouldn't forget. If she wanted to keep knocking over my trash can, then I was going to give her a trash can that she definitely wouldn't see coming. I waited until the next week before I set the plan into motion. I had the footage, the time-stamped proof that Karen had been repeatedly tampering with my property, and now it was time to design something cleverer than a leak of accusations or a direct confrontation. What I wanted was theatrical, memorable, and, most importantly, irrefutable. I wanted a moment that would flip the script so thoroughly that even the most devoted HOA sympathizers would have to pause and reconsider. I started with the trash can itself. Not just any bin, this one would be bespoke. I ordered a heavy-duty model built with reinforced hinges and a locking mechanism usually reserved for industrial use. It looked ordinary from afar. The same green shade, the same bulky lid, nothing about it screamed trap. But underneath the lid sat a secret, a lightweight, cleverly placed harness anchored to a concealed mount under the driveway. When the lid was forced open or the can pushed with enough force, the harness would extend only a few inches and then lock, stopping the can from being dragged more than a step. It wasn't meant to hurt anyone or to be malicious. It was meant to prevent abuse and to record the force and direction of interference. I also added a few theatrical flourishes. A thin ring of paint around the base, only visible if someone got very close, would scuff if the bin were dragged, and a tiny packet of biodegradable confetti tucked under the rim would burst open if the lid was aggressively jarred. Silly? Maybe. But symbolic, too. If she wanted to play games, I would give her a harmless, undeniable calling card that would prove her actions without me speaking a word. I rehearsed the setup in my head 100 times. The camera was already in place and streaming to my phone. The bin looked like every other curbside receptacle, and yet beneath that commonplace exterior I had built a scene that would tell a story. I wanted the footage to show not only that she had tampered with the can, but also that she couldn't do it subtly anymore. I wanted neighbors to see the consequences of her behavior without me needing to explain it. On the evening before pickup, I wheeled the new bin to the usual spot and left it upright. Lid snapped shut. Then I waited. This time, I didn't sit in my pajamas watching live footage. I watched with a different kind of patience. Calm, strategic, the kind that let the other person act first. I wanted to capture her natural behavior, unscripted and raw. It didn't take long. A few nights later, just after midnight again, the hour when boldness seems easy, she crept down the sidewalk. At first I almost felt a pang of pity at her furtive posture, but pity gave way quickly to resolve. She reached my driveway, scanned the street like a conspirator checking for witnesses, and then went straight for the bin. Her hand gripped the rim and she heaved. The confetti popped like a tiny, fragrant explosion, scattering little flakes into the air. The sound was faint but distinct, and on camera it looked almost comical, colorful paper fluttering like a burst of harmless protest. Then the harness engaged. The can swung only so far before it stopped as if hitting an invisible wall. She tried again, more forcefully this time, but the anchor held firm. The ring of paint scraped across the pavement, leaving a thin line that clearly showed the direction and distance of her pull. She huffed, muttered something under her breath, and looked around with the kind of frustration that could curdle milk. Here's the part I hadn't fully predicted. Instead of slinking away, she stood there for a long moment, staring at the can, fuming. Then she did something stranger. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small pad of paper and a pen, scribbled something quickly, and stuck it to the lid with a piece of tape. It fluttered weakly in the night breeze before she walked back toward her house. The camera had caught every movement, the timestamp glowing in the corner like a judge's face. When I watched the playback in the morning, the note was legible enough to make my blood run cold. It read, "This is a warning. Follow HOA rules or next time I'll make worse." It was the only admission I'd ever seen from her, a small, clumsy attempt to shift the narrative from vandal to enforcer. Apparently in her mind, leaving a threatening note somehow made her actions justifiable. I knew I had a decision to make. I could take the footage to the HOA board and let them handle it, but past experience had shown that boards love process more than they love truth. There would be meetings, vague apologies, and possible deflections. Karen had been an active voice at meetings before, and I doubted the board would want to alienate her without incontrovertible public pressure. Instead, I realized the power lay in transparency, letting neighbors become witnesses. So I put together a short clip, carefully edited, time-stamped, and captioned, showing the sequence of events from my camera. I kept the clip under 2 minutes to respect attention spans and highlighted the most damning moments: the approach, the shove, the confetti pop, and the note being left. No commentary, no rage-filled narration, only the footage and a few simple text overlays that pointed out what the viewer was seeing. I also included a clip of the previous footage for context, the first time she had been caught on camera pushing the bin over during an earlier week. The contrast between the two videos made the pattern undeniable. Then I created a post in the neighborhood group on social media. Not accusatory, just factual. "Neighbors, please review. This is happening at my driveway." Time-stamped footage included. I uploaded the clip and waited, heart thumping but determined. The response was swift. People commented, tagged others, and within an hour the post had dozens of views. Some offered sympathy, others asked if I had spoken to the HOA. A few suggested filing a police report, but something else happened that I hadn't expected. One neighbor, a quiet man named Omar who lived 2 houses down and rarely engaged in online drama, reached out privately. He told me he'd seen similar behavior from Karen directed at other houses, subtle, nagging actions meant to intimidate. He said he'd never spoken up because he feared escalation. His message was short but potent. If you're documenting this, we should all be documenting. It's not just about trash cans. I realized then that my little trap had tugged at a loose thread. Karen's behavior wasn't an isolated quirk. It was part of a pattern that touched the neighborhood. And while I hadn't wanted to start a war, I also didn't want anyone else to feel bullied into silence. The next step was no longer about revenge. It was about building a record and prompting accountability. I drafted a calm, clear message to the HOA board attaching the footage and the note. I requested their review and recommended mediation. I also politely told them I was prepared to file a police report if the behavior continued. I kept my tone neutral and my expectations modest. This was procedural groundwork, not a publicity stunt. Still, I shared the post in the neighborhood group with a simple heading: "For transparency, please review and advise." As reactions rolled in, a few neighbors expressed shock. Others expressed relief that someone had finally spoken up. A handful of card-carrying HOA loyalists suggested I was overreacting or that the footage might be staged. Predictably, the debate split the usual way. People who had little exposure to Karen's strict patrol instinctively defended the idea of community standards, while those who had endured her nitpicking nodded in grim agreement. The board called an emergency meeting for the following week. I considered what I would say, how to be firm without appearing vengeful, how to present evidence without a personal flair that could be misinterpreted. I printed copies of the footage timestamps, the note, and the maintenance log showing the repeated disturbances. I rehearsed my opening statement until it felt measured and steady. But no matter what the board decided, the neighborhood had already seen the footage. The image of the confetti popping and the can stopping mid-fall had lodged in people's minds. A small, undeniable proof that what I was saying wasn't paranoia. That alone changed the energy in the community. By the time the HOA meeting rolled around, the air in the neighborhood felt heavier than usual. People who normally waved casually at each other now whispered in small groups on the sidewalks. I could feel the tension every time I stepped outside. Neighbors who had seen the footage gave me subtle nods, almost like they were saying, "We saw what you did, and we're glad someone finally did it." Others avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable that the neighborhood's unwritten code of silence had been broken. The meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock in the community center, a bland little building that smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. I arrived early, carrying my neatly organized folder with printed screenshots, timestamps, and the copy of Karen's note. A projector had been set up for anyone who wanted to share visuals, and I knew exactly what I planned to show. When Karen walked in, the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. She strode confidently, clipboard in hand, wearing her usual expression that mixed superiority with suspicion. She greeted a few board members like old friends, then sat down across from me, narrowing her eyes slightly, as if she already knew I was the one who had put her under a spotlight. The meeting began with routine business, maintenance updates, budget approvals, small landscaping requests, but I barely heard a word of it. My pulse pounded as I waited for the chairperson to announce my item on the agenda. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he looked in my direction and said, "Next. We have a homeowner who wishes to bring forward a concern about repeated disturbances." I stood up, careful to keep my tone calm and professional. "Thank you for the time tonight," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I want to address a recurring issue involving interference with my property, specifically my trash can, which has been repeatedly tampered with." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly aware of where this was headed. Karen crossed her arms and leaned back, her lips tightening into a thin line. "I want to be clear," I continued, "that this isn't a matter of minor inconvenience. It's a repeated pattern that has created both mess and stress." To avoid speculation, I decided to document what was happening. With that, I turned to the projector and played the first clip, the one showing Karen shoving the bin and dragging it into the street. Gasps rippled across the room. Even though many neighbors had seen the shorter version online, there was something about seeing it projected in that formal setting. With the timestamp glowing, that made it impossible to dismiss. I paused the video and said, "This happened more than once, so I installed additional measures to capture further evidence." Then I played the second clip, the one with the confetti popping and the harness stopping the bin mid-drag. This time, a few people chuckled nervously at the absurdity of it, but the humor only made the seriousness more striking. Finally, I displayed the scanned copy of the note Karen had left. The room went silent. The words glared from the screen like a confession. "This is a warning. Follow HOA rules or next time I'll make worse." I let the silence linger for a moment before speaking again. This is not about enforcing community standards. This is harassment. This is intimidation. And it affects not just me, but the sense of trust we should have in our neighborhood. When I sat down, the chairperson cleared his throat. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We'll open the floor for discussion." That's when the fireworks began. One board member, a man named George, immediately turned to Karen. "Do you deny this is you in the footage?" he asked. His voice wasn't accusatory, more weary, like he didn't want to be dragged into drama but couldn't avoid it. Karen sat up straighter, her cheeks flushing. "This is completely out of context," she snapped. The trash can was violating HOA placement rules. It was too close to the curb, blocking access for pedestrians. I was simply correcting the violation. A murmur rippled through the audience. Someone whispered, "At midnight." Another muttered, "With a warning note." I stayed quiet, letting the absurdity of her defense hang in the air. Then Omar, the quiet neighbor who had messaged me privately, stood up. "I don't usually speak at these meetings," he began, his voice soft but clear. "But I've witnessed similar behavior from Karen toward my own property. Small things, moving my recycling bin, leaving notes, questioning me about my landscaping. I didn't record it, but seeing this footage, it's the same pattern. The effect was immediate. People who had been hesitant began nodding. A woman across the room added, "She's done the same to me. She told me my holiday wreath was too large and removed it herself." Another voice chimed in. She left a note on my car for parking in front of my own house. The board tried to regain order as voices overlapped, each neighbor emboldened by the other's admissions. For the first time, Karen looked rattled. Her face reddened, her mouth opened as if to argue, but the sheer volume of testimonies drowned her out. Finally, the chairperson raised his hand. Enough. We'll need to review this formally. But based on what we've seen and heard tonight, it's clear there's a broader concern that requires immediate attention. He turned to Karen. Until this is resolved, I'm instructing you to cease any interference with other homeowners' property. Any further incidents will result in fines and possible removal from the board. Karen's jaw dropped. Removal? You can't, but the chairperson cut her off. We can. And if you continue this behavior, we will. The meeting adjourned soon after, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. For once, the room wasn't under Karen's shadow. People lingered afterward, chatting with me, thanking me for taking the risk of bringing the issue forward. Omar clapped me on the shoulder, and a few others offered to help monitor if more incidents occurred. Walking home, I felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. Relief that the truth was finally out in the open, but anticipation because I knew Karen wasn't the type to back down quietly. Her pride had taken a direct hit, and people like her rarely swallow defeat gracefully. Sure enough, the following morning I noticed her curtains twitching as I wheeled my trash can back from the curb. Her face appeared briefly in the window, eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight, as if she were already plotting her next move. But something fundamental had changed. She wasn't untouchable anymore. She had been exposed, her power dented, and the community had rallied around me instead of her. Whatever came next, I wasn't standing alone. In the days following the meeting, the neighborhood felt different. The invisible tension that had hung over everyone's porches and driveways had loosened, replaced with a cautious sort of camaraderie. Neighbors who had barely exchanged a nod before now stopped to chat, often beginning with the same phrase. "I can't believe you caught that on camera." For once, the conversations weren't whispered complaints about Karen behind closed doors. They were open acknowledgments that her reign of nitpicking had finally been challenged. But if I felt any temptation to relax, the sight of Karen's narrowed eyes each time I passed her house reminded me it wasn't over. People like her didn't just stop. They regrouped, recalculated, and found new ways to cling to control. And I had the sense that in her mind, I hadn't embarrassed her in front of the neighborhood, I had declared war. The first retaliation came quietly. 3 mornings after the meeting, I woke up to find a violation notice taped to my door. According to the HOA form, my trash can had been left in public view outside of approved collection hours. The irony was almost laughable. The bin had been at the curb for less than 12 hours, exactly in line with the rules. I knew instantly whose handwriting filled the notes section of the violation slip. Tidy, slanted cursive with aggressive underlining. I took a picture of the notice, printed out the HOA's actual guidelines, and sent both to the board with a polite request for clarification. Within an hour, I received an apologetic email. This notice was issued in error. Please disregard. No doubt they recognized the stunt for what it was. Still, the fact that Karen had tried again so quickly told me I had to stay sharp. The second retaliation was harder to ignore. A week later, as I pulled into my driveway after work, I noticed a faint but unmistakable scratch running down the side of my car. Not deep enough to be catastrophic, but obvious enough to sting. I couldn't prove Karen had done it. There were no cameras facing the street at that angle, but the timing was suspicious. Too suspicious. For a brief moment, anger surged through me, hot and unfiltered. Part of me wanted to march to her front door and demand answers. But then I reminded myself of the bigger picture. This wasn't about satisfying my temper, it was about protecting my credibility. If I lost my cool, she'd use it against me. Instead, I doubled down. I installed an additional camera angled toward the street, covering my car and driveway in crystal-clear HD. I documented the scratch, logged the date, and saved the footage from the previous night just in case. My strategy was simple. Keep gathering evidence, keep staying calm, and let her dig her own grave. Meanwhile, the neighborhood itself was shifting in ways I hadn't predicted. The footage I'd posted online continued to circulate, and word spread beyond our block. Nearby, residents from other subdivisions chimed in with their own Karen stories, sharing screenshots of passive-aggressive notes or recounting bizarre confrontations over trivial matters. What had once felt like a private feud now looked like part of a much larger pattern of behavior. A few neighbors approached me with an idea. Why not create a neighborhood watch group, but one focused less on crime and more on accountability? Not to spy on each other, but to make sure everyone was treated fairly. The suggestion sparked something in me. Maybe this whole ordeal wasn't just about me or my trash can. Maybe it was about redefining how we lived together, resisting the culture of intimidation that had crept into our streets. I agreed to help set it up. We started small, a private chat group with a handful of neighbors who wanted to share information and support one another. Omar joined immediately, as did the woman whose wreath had been removed. Within a week, the group had doubled in size. People began posting small updates. A suspicious car seen circling the block, a broken streetlight that needed repair, even just reminders about trash pickup schedules. It wasn't long before Karen noticed. She wasn't invited to the group, of course, but whispers travel fast. One evening, as I collected my mail, she stormed across the street, clipboard clutched in her hand like a weapon. "You think you can undermine the HOA with your little gossip club?" She spat, her voice low but seething. I kept my tone measured. "It's not gossip. It's neighbors supporting each other." Her eyes blazed. "You're poisoning this community, stirring people up against the rules. If you keep this up, you'll regret it." I held her gaze, resisting the urge to rise to her bait. "The only thing I regret is how much energy you spend on making people miserable." Then I turned, walked inside, and shut the door before she could reply. That night, as I replayed the encounter in my head, I realized something had shifted again, but this time in me. Where once her words would have left me shaken, now they barely scratched the surface. She wasn't an unstoppable force anymore. She was just a bitter neighbor clinging to a crumbling sense of authority, and she knew it, too. The following week brought the breaking point. Trash day arrived again, and for the first time in months, my bin remained untouched. No scratches on my car, no notes on my door. At first, I thought she had finally given up. But later that evening, I spotted a small group gathered outside her house, listening as she ranted loudly about the decline of community standards and neighbors who don't respect authority. I didn't need to hear the exact words to know what she meant. She was trying to rally supporters to rebuild her influence, but the faces around her told a different story. Polite smiles, averted eyes, the kind of body language people use when they're humoring someone rather than agreeing with them. It struck me then that the power Karen once held wasn't rooted in genuine respect. It was rooted in fear. Fear of being singled out, fear of confrontation, fear of being the next target of her crusade. And once that fear had been pierced, once people realized she could be challenged, her control was gone. Still, I knew better than to underestimate her. Pride is a dangerous fuel, and Karen's tank was still full. The question was not whether she would try again, it was how, and as fate would have it, the answer came sooner than I expected. One Friday evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I heard a commotion outside. Voices raised, footsteps quick, the sound of something heavy crashing to the pavement. I rushed to the window and saw a scene that made my stomach lurch. There was a Karen, standing in the middle of the street, arguing with another neighbor. My bin lay tipped over at the edge of the driveway, trash spilling out like a defeated soldier. But this time she wasn't caught by a hidden camera. She was caught in plain sight, dozens of neighbors stepping out onto porches, watching the spectacle unfold. Her voice carried, shrill and angry. "This neighborhood is falling apart because of people like him." She pointed at my house, her face red with fury. "And if no one else will enforce the rules, then I will." The crowd murmured, restless, shifting from foot to foot. The balance of power teetered in that moment, and I knew the next step would decide everything. The scene outside my house that Friday night felt like the climax of a movie I hadn't realized I'd been starring in. Karen stood in the middle of the street, one hand clutching her clipboard like it was a shield, the other gesturing wildly toward my trash can as if it were a criminal in need of punishment. The bin lay on its side, bags spilling onto the asphalt, lit by the last streaks of fading sunlight and the glow of nearby porch lights. Neighbors lined the sidewalks and porches. Some held their phones, recording. Others just folded their arms, shaking their heads. I stepped out of my house calmly, determined not to let my emotions write the script for me. Karen, on the other hand, was unraveling. You see this? She shrieked, pointing at the overturned bin. This is what happens when rules aren't followed. Trash in the street. Rats will come, diseases. This is why we need structure. This is why I do what I do. I took a slow breath and walked toward her, my phone in hand. Karen, I said evenly, everyone here knows that bin didn't fall on its own. You pushed it. Again. Her eyes flashed. Lies. You staged this. You're trying to ruin me. You've been manipulating this whole neighborhood against me with your videos and your so-called watch group. The crowd murmured again, louder this time. Someone called out, "We all saw you, Karen." Another voice chimed in, "Stop blaming him for your own behavior." Karen's face tightened, but she doubled down. "You're all blind. Without me, this neighborhood would fall apart. Do you think the HOA cares about your safety? About your property values? No. I'm the one who enforces the standards around here." I held up my phone. "Actually, Karen, the HOA already told you to stop. And guess what? This entire meltdown is being recorded, not just by me, but by half the people standing here." Her expression faltered just for a second. That split-second crack told me she realized her grip was slipping. But pride wouldn't let her stop. She tried one more desperate move. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "Fine. Let's see how you like it when the HOA fines you into bankruptcy." "I'll make sure they do. I'll make sure." That's when George, the board member from the meeting, stepped forward. He had been watching quietly from the crowd, but now his voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Enough," he said firmly. "Karen, this has gone too far. You were warned. You've harassed your neighbors, tampered with property, and now you're creating a public disturbance. As of this moment, I'm recommending your immediate removal from the HOA board." Gasps echoed. Karen spun toward him, her mouth open in disbelief. "You can't. You don't have the authority." But George didn't flinch. "The board does. And trust me, we'll have the votes." He glanced at the crowd. "Anyone here still think Karen is acting in the best interest of this community?" Silence, not a single hand raised. Instead, neighbors shook their heads, muttered agreement, or simply stared at her with tired, exasperated eyes. It was over. Karen sputtered, searching for words that wouldn't come. She turned in a slow circle as if expecting someone, anyone, to defend her. But the crowd stayed still, unified in their quiet refusal to back her up. Finally, with a strangled sound that was half growl, half sob, she stormed back to her house, slamming the door so hard the echo lingered long after she disappeared inside. The bin lay on its side, a casualty of her tantrum. I walked over, set it upright, and brushed my hands together. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. After months of being knocked down, it was finally standing tall, just like me. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Omar's voice rang out. "About time." The crowd broke into laughter, relieved, cathartic, the sound of a community releasing months of pent-up frustration. That night, my neighborhood changed for good. The next week, the HOA board voted unanimously to remove Karen from her position. She wasn't happy about it, of course she wasn't, but she couldn't fight the unanimous decision. Without the badge of authority she'd used as a weapon, she lost her power to intimidate. Neighbors stopped answering her notes. People rolled their eyes instead of obeying. And gradually, the endless nitpicking that had defined life on our street faded into something quieter, something freer. As for me, I didn't need revenge beyond that. I didn't need to see her punished more severely or humiliated further. The exposure was enough. The footage, the confrontation, the final collapse of her control, it was the kind of justice that didn't need embellishment. Still, the experience changed me. Before Karen, I had thought of myself as someone who preferred peace, who avoided conflict at all costs. And while that was still true in many ways, I learned that peace doesn't come from silence in the face of intimidation. Sometimes standing up, even in small creative ways, is the only path to calm. The neighborhood watch group continued to grow, transforming into something more meaningful than any of us had imagined. We organized monthly check-ins, shared resources, even coordinated block parties that brought us closer together. What started as a response to one person's toxic behavior turned into the foundation of a stronger, kinder community. Karen still lived on our street, of course. I'd see her now and then, usually behind her curtains or hurrying from her car to her front door. She didn't smile, didn't wave, and never spoke to me directly again. Maybe she was plotting. Maybe she was stewing in her own bitterness. But it no longer mattered. She wasn't my problem anymore. One morning, as I rolled my trash can to the curb, Omar joined me. He glanced at the bin, then at me, and smirked. "So, think she'll ever try again?" I chuckled. "If she does, I've got more cameras than a reality show now. She wouldn't stand a chance." He laughed, and for the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't dreading trash day. The simple act of wheeling that bin out no longer carried a knot of tension in my stomach. It was just another chore, ordinary and uneventful, exactly how it should be. And as I walked back up the driveway, the early morning sun warming my face, I felt something even stronger than relief. I felt gratitude. Gratitude that one neighbor's obsession hadn't been able to define my life forever. Gratitude that when I stood up, others had stood with me. Gratitude that sometimes the simplest traps, like a reinforced trash can and a burst of confetti, can reveal the truth more powerfully than any confrontation ever could. Because in the end, the story wasn't really about a trash can. It was about drawing a line. It was about saying, enough. And it was about proving that even when someone tries to knock you over again and again, you can still stand tall, and that's exactly what I did.